legislation.
It actually feels that way.
Limousines and hot tubs.
Not necessarily that order, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, well.
They knew it.
700 to GTAC.
Out of the
Yeah,
10 mil
right.
they allocate?
I'm working in that county.
So what's
Government
more
night and
generous
day,
stuff?
from the morning of the election to the morning after.
People are smiling.
Oh, yeah.
Freeland's PC the crime reported.
Blow it down.
Okay, we are recording.
Hearsay is allowed.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Mr. Chair.
Wade. So they shouldn't take terribly long.
Thank you,
Oh,
Julie.
Welcome, everyone. I'm sorry for the delay getting started here this morning.
Real touchy.
I want to call this meeting of the Criminal Justice Commission to order. I want to start with some introductions, and if anybody in the audience would like to introduce yourself, we have some new faces here today, so feel free to do so. My name is Robert Ball. I'm chair of the Criminal Justice Commission, and starting on my left,
Wait, Rob Bovet, Legal Counsel, Association of Oregon Counties.
Rod Underhill, Multnomah County's District Attorney.
Greg Hezzer-Abedian, Commissioner.
Kiki Park Rose, Community Corrections Director in Klamath County.
Mike Schmidt, Executive Director of the Criminal Justice Commission, staff to this commission.
And Wally Hicks, Josephine County Council.
Floyd Przanowski, State Senator, District 4, which includes parts of Lane and Douglas counties.
and we have some members on the phone, I believe.
Yes, Dwayne Stark, you guys sound like you're on the far side of the room from the mic.
We'll try to move that closer.
And anybody in the audience would like to introduce themselves? Patrick?
Patrick Singh, I work with Rob Bovet at Association of Oregon Counties. Glad to be a strong partner of this Criminal Justice Commission.
Anybody else in the audience? Sir?
My name is Alan Gallagher, retired Oregon attorney, university professor, and PhD candidate working on collateral consequences dissertation.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much. I want to get started right away with our agenda. First of all, the consideration for a Department of Corrections request for a trip to Norway to see how their criminal justice system works, specifically their prisons. Mike, do you want to go ahead and talk about this?
Yeah, so actually Liz Craig from Department of Corrections is here, so she can talk about how DOC got this grant and award, and then what their ask is for us.
Sure. Good morning. Liz Craig with Department of Corrections. I'm here on behalf of Director Peters, and Oregon DOC was one of 2 states that was chosen this year to participate in this program, which is called the U.S. European Criminal Justice Innovation Program. It's a year-long program sponsored by the Prison Law Office out of Berkeley and the Criminal Justice and Health Program at the University of California, San Francisco. And the goal is really to give participants in the program an insight into European criminal justice systems and to develop action plans to bring back to Oregon in order to improve the corrections system here in our state. Several states have gone before us. One is North Dakota, and since they participated in the program, they've made a number of changes within their system, and then they are looking at some more long-term system-level reform goals for things like diversion of mentally ill arrestees, research-informed decision-making in the judiciary, pretrial services pilot program, and the expanded use of compassionate release for seriously ill inmates. So there's 3 main components to the program. One is a site visit to Norway, which is what we're talking about here, where we will do several facilities tours. We will meet with different leaders from the Norway system, but also from other European systems. And then we will spend some time doing work sessions where we will develop our action plan to bring back to Oregon and then work on over the following year. We are also required to participate in state and national presentations of our projects once we've started our work, and we will participate in a formal program evaluation. The program will pay for 6 team members, and we have selected those team members. So there's 3 from DOC, House Majority Leader Jennifer Williamson, Senator Winters, and Rep. Stark. And what we're looking for is to add up to 3 members to our team to represent a more broad cross-section of the criminal justice system.
Great. And just to add to that, so as Liz mentioned, the legislative members, the one House and party we are lacking is the Senate Democrat. We don't have a Democratic senator. And Representative Stark, who is one of our commissioners, is going on behalf of the House. So it would make sense, I think, for Senator Przanski to be sent from our commission, and myself sent as director of the commission to help on doing this work. But that does leave another spot if we decided to use it as a commission. The way we would pay for this would be out of Burn Jag, which is why it's a vote in front of you today. And we expect the anticipated cost probably.
My simple math is about $7,500 for 3 participants, give or take.
Yeah. So that is the decision before the commission this morning.
Okay, we originally had a representative from the governor's office going with our team of 3. That person's no longer going to go, so we will have 1 open slot. And so what I would suggest to the commission today is that we vote to authorize up to 3 people, and then we'll figure out who the 3rd person might be, would be my recommendation. So.
And if I could just add one thing, the program is very particular about team member selection, and so whatever you decide, we will have to run by the program for final approval. So far, we haven't had any issues with that. I just want to put that out there.
Okay, no problem. Do I hear a motion from the floor?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All opposed? Hearing none, so approved. The next item on our agenda is the legislative update from Director Schmidt.
All right. Go this way. Oh, great. And it's on the, I'll go down at the table. Members of the Commission, Mike Schmidt, Executive Director of the Criminal Justice Commission, and talking about the 2017 session that just wrapped up. I thought I would just give you kind of a high-level overview of some of the bills that impact the Criminal Justice Commission, and can talk in more detail about any of these if you're interested or offline, but just to give you kind of a lay of the land of what happened in this session that pertains to us. I won't be covering, because I've not yet put together the final list, and I'll probably be reaching out to a couple of you to help me out with this. The bills that we're going to have to do classifications on the crimes. I don't have that exhaustive list put together yet. Still need to work on that. So these are more substantive bills that affect the Criminal Justice Commission, not the ones that we'll necessarily be ranking. So I'm just going to jump right into the bills. Feel free to ask me questions as we go through. So I start off with House Bill 3078, the so-called Safety and Savings Act. What's it do in broad strokes? It expands short-term transitional leave from 90 to 120 days. It removes identity theft and theft in the first degree from ballot measure 57 crimes. So now that's back to the old repo crime scheme. And I can talk more about what that means. Expands the FSAP program, which changes some of the sideboards around women that would be eligible and criteria that made them ineligible. And most importantly to this commission, it establishes the Justice Reinvestment Downward Departure Supplemental Funding of $7 million. So how does it affect us? We will be tasked, staff is tasked with creating an annual report to the legislature, so that's additional workload for us that we'll have to be doing. And then really this $7 million creates a new old grant. So in our budget, which I'll talk about later, we got justice reinvestment funding at $40 million, current service level, just like we had in the last biennium, into the coming biennium. This $7 million is there to enhance and supplement justice reinvestment work, but it specifically calls out the goal of decreasing prison usage. Unlike the justice reinvestment, where that is one of the goals, to be sure, there's also recidivism reduction, public safety enhancement, accountability. This augmented $7 million is separate from that. And it's, if you look at the statute, it's notwithstanding some of the statutory requirements of that $40 million, which means it's not to the old by formula, every county gets their percentage of it kind of a scenario. It's more a targeted needs grant for counties that raise their hand and say, you know, we either have or want to establish a downward departure program in our county, and we need some shoring up, and this is what our ask is. So there's really, for the commission, not a lot of sidebars on how it is we make those decisions. The one caveat is that we are to give preference to new programs that are not already in existence, so expanding counties that have these types of programs. But otherwise, we're not limited to that. We can certainly help shore up programs. This money was just approved. This was, you know, kind of last days of session. So staff, we have been talking about what would it look like. Obviously, you all know our justice reinvestment grants are out to the counties. They're already working on those things. And ideally, this supplemental money would be you know, part of their already ongoing application planning, that they would be able to kind of leverage funds to help each other out. So we want to get the word out to counties as soon as possible that these funds are available so that they can, you know, incorporate this into their planning process. And so we will be going out to the Association of Community Directors, Community Justice, and talking about that, and we'll be going out to other groups of our stakeholders to talk to them about this money, LIP6, and just trying to get the word out. We're still trying to put a little bit of the structure in terms of what we see, how it should fund things, and that's open, like I said, to commissioner weigh-in and interpretation. We have some thoughts on that as staff, as what we think would make the most sense to kind of spread this as far as we could to help as many counties get involved as we possibly can. And I'm happy to talk about that further if anyone has questions.
Mike, could you expand on that? I know we've talked about it, about the initial ideas the staff has to target the funds.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the immediate challenges that we'll face with $7 million, and it's actually $6.3 million because this is subject to the 10% victims services, 10% that the other JRI funds are subject to. So we're actually talking about $6.3 million. Obviously, that spread across 36 counties doesn't go really far, especially when you start taking into account some of our larger counties. So what staff has talked about is making these targeted grants available really to kind of enhance the structure of the programs. And by that, I mean the critical positions that are needed to make these programs run. So if you are setting up one of these downward dispositional departure programs, it might make sense to have a dedicated deputy district attorney in the office who will manage all of these cases and work closely with parole and probation. You're also going to be doing front-end analysis and looking at tools like the LSCMI and other kinds of things to look at risk and need. So, you know, those kinds of things also take work to administer those tools on the front end. So you could be, counties could say, you know, we need some of this targeted need money for a PO who's going to be dedicated to running this caseload and communicating that information to the courts and to the district attorney's office or however they set up their program. You know, there could be other staff needs that a county could say, you know, this is really what we need to make this program work. In our specialty courts programs, which we'll be talking about later, we see that frequently, where you need a court administrator to make sure things run on time. You might need a deputy district attorney or a defense attorney to make these things work. One of the reasons that staff thinks that that's a good idea is because if the justice reinvestment money, that can be used on treatment, alcohol and drug treatment, housing, all of those things that we know that these programs need. And a lot of times it's our experience that counties rightfully, you know, wanted to put their priorities there, to use as much of that money to expand treatment and those things. But sometimes that spread the work that was being done a little bit thin. And we think we could get better and more consistent results if the programs were more solidly staffed. So that's one reason. The other reason is a very practical one. By making it a targeted needs grant that would supplement the structures and the staff, it kind of limits in some ways the monumental asks that we could see. Not to single out Multnomah County with District Attorney Underhill here, newly on our commission. But, you know, I could anticipate if these funds were available for treatment and housing, Multnomah County rightfully would say, we need $3 million of that to supplement our program. And not that they don't. But then, of course, with $6.3 million to spread around the state, that really gobbles up a lot of the money. So we think by making it a targeted needs grant to enhance those structural components of making programs successful, that we can actually spread these dollars out a little bit further and get some more bang from our buck. So that's where staff is at right now. That's our thought process on this. But like I say, I'm open to dialogue now or as you marinate on it and think about it, you know, to moving that. But that's kind of where our head's at.
Do you have a timeline that you'd like to see us make this decision by?
You know, we don't need to make a formal decision. We're not going to enter into rulemaking. It's not required. So it doesn't need to be a vote of the commission, but sooner the better as you're having thoughts to communicate those with staff, because we will be communicating to stakeholders. Our deadline for Justice Reinvestment Grants is August 1st, I believe. 31st. Okay, August 31st. So we have a little bit more time. But ideally, we'll get these kind of outlined to them, I'd say, no later than the beginning of August, so that they still have some time to build it into their applications. So yeah, please, either we can have a discussion now, afterwards, or reach out to me and staff with your thoughts on that.
Another question, a little more general.
Commissioner Underhill.
Thank you. So relative to the creation of new programs versus emphasizing or adding to existing programs, there may be programs around the state that have existing programs that want to add a new crime category to that already existing structure. So in other words, expand to property, expand to drugs, expand to domestic violence, whatever that program might be, to expand into these different areas. Is that viewed as, what way would that be looked at relative to the structure design?
You know, I mean, we really are just looking at the statute. So it would be up for your interpretation as a commission to say this is a new program versus this is really just the same program and we want to expand into other counties that have nothing. The only criteria that you are legislatively, statutorily obligated to put on it is, will this program decrease prison usage for the investment?
Any other commissioner comments or thoughts? Yes.
I have just another question. So this is all going to be one grant application?
So, no. We already have the Justice Reinvestment Grant application out there. And not all 36 counties, we don't anticipate all 36 counties will want to take advantage of this additional funds. There are going to probably be some counties that are not willing to sign up for a program that specifically only is targeting that one thing. So they're supposed to try, we want them to see them working together, right? That you're putting money into alcohol and drug treatment, housing, and all those things you need, and then this extra funds gives you the structure you need for the program. Hopefully there's some synergy between the applications, but right now as staff we're creating the next thing that a county could go on and add this supplemental application to the process. And so it's kind of a two-step. Some counties might be doing both, some counties might be doing one.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioner questions or input? Okay.
Anyone think that's a good vote or a good way to go? Would be also helpful.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I've had the benefit of time to think about it. You know, the one thing I think that we do need to somehow put clearly out there when we're sending this out, exactly what it's for. You know, if our one criteria is going to be keeping people out of prison, then we should, or staff should have, you know, a way to look at that and make sure that I think it would be a bad idea just to say here's $7 million without some sort of structure. We need to have some way that you're getting feedback, you know, that says that this is working somehow. So.
Yep.
So, comment from my standpoint as well. Everybody, you know, all the jurisdictions need more resources, period, across the board relative to treatment and emphasis. But the notion of people to really organize and create frameworks for programs that's good old-fashioned, employees within offices around the state. And so when you list ideas that this is an effort to enhance parole and probation, dedicated POs, individuals to administer the risk needs assessments, potentially DDAs or potentially members of the defense bar to actually work with these programs. I think that is a good area to invest specifically, while at the same time balancing the needs of that other grant, JRI grant, the $37 million, that is spread more in the services, right, or in the treatment needs. I think it's a nice complement to one another.
Great.
Any other thoughts or comments? So we don't really need an official vote
Nope.
for this? Okay.
Nope, just marinate on that, think about thoughts or feedback, and communicate those to staff.
That'd be great.
All right. House Bill 2355, the so-called, I don't know if this is what it's called, but it's the racial profiling bill. Came out of the Attorney General's task force on racial profiling. This bill, what's it do? It mandates collection of statewide stop data across all law enforcement agencies, police agencies, and sheriff's agencies. And then charges the Criminal Justice Commission with analyzing that data. So step one, OSP got money to build a system. And so they're going to be working on implementing this system across the state, looking at the different ways that police officers enter data into stops, and hopefully making it as least onerous as possible, that they're not adding extra work, but building it into existing systems that they can pull from the RMS CAD systems, and they're the experts on being able to do that. So they are going to be taking the next year to make sure that all agencies across the state are equipped with the tools that they need to track this data. Once that data is being collected and tracked, the CJC is actually where it is going to go, where it's going to be analyzed anyway. We still have to figure out where it's actually going to be housed. But we are going to be the agency in charge of taking all that data, doing the analysis, and then determining what we see based on that data. From there, we communicate that information both with the law enforcement agencies and also with DPSST. DPSST receives some funds to enhance training around profiling and racial bias. So they will be doing that training across the state. And then wherever, if we encounter any jurisdictions where this seems to be problematic based on the data, we can work with them, do specific training that hopefully will remediate any kind of a profiling situation. So this is a big lift for the agency in terms of the work that we're going to have to do. The other thing that this bill does, which is not necessarily relevant to the work of the Criminal Justice Commission, is it changes first and second possession of controlled substance convictions from C felonies to A misdemeanors. And so that's a big change in terms of the law of the land. Some counties have already gone this way. Actually, multiple counties have already started programs like this, but this will be a statewide change. If you are already a felon, then you do not get the benefit of the A misdemeanor by statute. Of course, it could probably be offered to you by the district attorney. Or if it's your third conviction for a PCS, then you would still go the normal course of being a Class C felony. But as you all know, a Class C felony is a level 1 on our grid and means that you'll be put on probation. No prison is available for that. So other impacts to CJC staff, we received 2 positions to do this work, the racial analysis and profiling. We asked for a very high-level research position. We got brushed back on that. We were not given that position. So instead, what they gave us was an ISS 6, which we actually already have an ISS 6 in agency that we were paying for before, but that's Alex, who does all of our website stuff, helps us get all our dashboards online. So Alex will be part of working on this project and getting the data out, obviously, as we're posting these things and making it transparent and accessible. He'll be key to that. And then we have a research analyst 4, an RA4, coming online halfway through the biennium to actually help us engage in that analysis. So we're getting 2, and those are full-time permanent positions, not limited duration. So that's really great news for the agency to help us continue to do the work that we're doing. And then other things, we have an obligation to report to the legislature on effects of the PCS changes. And like I said, we'll be presenting any findings we have to local law enforcement agencies as we go through and analyze the data.
Commissioner Hicks?
Thank you. Okay, just pausing for a moment on the concept of a stop, the infamous Terry stop, the reasonable stop. And so, OSP pulls somebody over, well, that's a stop. But, Portland PD walks up to a guy sleeping on a park bench. What is that? And so I'd be interested in seeing what the different agencies report in terms of their stop figures, going forward, and finding out if there is kind of a varying definition throughout the state of what exactly is a stop.
I believe, and maybe Rob, you know this, I believe this pertains only to traffic stops. I don't believe it pertains to the walk-up stops.
Is there any way of getting there? Or is it just because of that reason that we just don't even want to try to tackle that?
There are probably some technological things. If you're walking up as a police officer, you might not have your system there, and police officers saying, you're not stopped, you are stopped, and making that call. It can get...
Greg's argued that one.
Do you feel free to leave?
Do you feel free to leave?
There it is.
So and the bill does cover officer-initiated pedestrian stops and officer-initiated traffic stops.
Okay.
So, we're going to be collecting a lot of data, and I guess we'll just see where it goes from there.
Yep.
I can say Portland already does it. It's really easy.
Okay.
We just put it in the computer when you get it done. So,
Following up on what Wally said, will there be a denotion as to whether it's a pedestrian type of intervention versus a traffic? If not, it seems like a field we may want, just to see if we see different numbers or perspectives on the population that's being hit.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. It's not been determined yet because they're right now at the RFP process of getting vendors to tell us what they're going to build. So we'll keep that in mind as a good idea to include that field. Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion about that, or?
Okay. Senate Bill 1041. Alcohol and drug treatment dollars. What's it do? This one is really all about CJC. We are tasked with working with OHA, OYA, DHS, and DOC to track all state and federal dollars that go through this state and are used on alcohol and drug treatment. That's both internally and externally. So if they contract out or if they in-house those kinds of services. That alone is probably going to be quite a feat for us to pull off. But there's a second step, which is then we have to determine what outcomes we are receiving for those treatment dollars. And the biggest, I think, one of the biggest challenges, there are many challenges to this, one of the biggest is that we are not restricted to the criminally involved populations, that this is for all alcohol and drug treatment money in the state and the programs that it supports. So, we're going to have to really think about what outcomes we are trying to track. This is a little bit outside of the expertise of this agency, and so we will be drawing on advice and working with our partner groups to help us come up with this. But the legislature was adamant that they thought that this commission was the best place for this work to be done, despite some of the other agencies that are involved. So that's both flattering and also a lot of work for the agency. And they gave us one full-time limited duration body to get it done in 2 years. So that person will be incredibly busy across the state. But I do think there is a lot of headway that we can make in this area, and tracking our dollars and trying to map the system. There has been work done already in the state on this area, so we'll piggyback off of that to get us started. So it's ambitious. It's a big undertaking. It'll be a lot of work for staff, but hopefully if we do it right, this is information that not only you will all be able to use as local officials looking at treatment agencies and how dollars flow and how they're stacked up from different agencies, because as you all probably already realize, you could have a grant from OHA, OYA, DOC, and CJC all within one treatment agency, but the agencies who are giving those grants might not necessarily understand that they're all supplying those agencies. But also outcomes and figuring out how the outcomes are. So hopefully it's good information for people who are making local decisions, and also great information for commissions like yourself and other major agencies that are making grant decisions on where to target resources. So it's going to be a big lift, a lot of work, but hopefully will really pay off.
Any questions or comments about that?
I have a question. Mike, do you anticipate cooperation from the CCOs?
We have already been reached out to by some representatives of CCOs, so we're going to be having those conversations. And there was some testimony at the Ways and Means hearing on this bill that they were supportive, and that they welcome the opportunity to show the good work that they do in the state with state dollars. So yeah, I think I anticipate we will have cooperation. But we will be forging partnerships that we haven't had in the past, and so there will be a little bit of figuring out how to get this work done, how to communicate, things like that.
Any other comments or questions? Okay.
All right. House Bill 2238. This was a bill submitted by the governor's office on CJC's behalf. And what this does is it reestablishes the Public Safety Task Force, which is the body that oversees the Justice Reinvestment Funds. That body sunset officially on January 1 of 2017. So the governor's office is going to have to reappoint all of those positions. But we thought it was important that that body continue to do their oversight work in this area. And added to their list of things that they oversee is the pretrial reform work that we are doing as staff around the state. So they'll also have a hand as kind of the head oversight body of that work. So we're excited to see that that passed. The other thing that this does is the commission was tasked with doing racial and ethnic impact statements upon request from one member of each party in either of the chambers. And this has not been a very utilized part of the law, but we have had to do it several times for any kind of legislation that comes up. As long as there is a sponsor from both parties that asks us to do it, we would do a racial and ethnic impact analysis. The way the law was written when it first passed said that we would do a racial and ethnic impact analysis on any bill that had something to do that might impact the prison population or criminal justice. That led to us getting requests and deep conversations about education spending and ballot measures that might augment education and after-school programs. That made us uncomfortable that we might be brought into a ballot measure conversation and have to say, well, yeah, funding after school programs will reduce Oregon's prison population 12 years from now by 2%. Or, we couldn't, to even wrap our minds around how we would do that analysis, it would take many years to really do a good and thorough job and not just, give a guess. But the statute allowed for us to turn that around in somewhere between 2 weeks and 30 days. So that wasn't a comfortable place for us. So what we asked in this bill for the legislature to do was bring that back to any kind of legislation or ballot measures related to crime that will have an impact on the criminal justice system. That's much more in our wheelhouse of analysis that we can do. So there's that piece of it. And then also there was a piece on human social services and racial and ethnic impacts. CJC was tasked with doing that. We asked that that task go to DHS if requested. They have the data. We would have had to request the data from them, analyze the data that they gave us. It was just kind of making us a middleman in their data. So we thought it made sense that it just that responsibility live with them. That part of the statute has not been utilized since the passage of this bill. So those are the major changes of the overall bill. Impact on us is really just continuing to staff the Public Safety Task Force as we've been doing, and the governor's office will have to reappoint.
Okay. Any discussion on that? Okay, moving on.
Senate Bill 26, and this was actually requested in consultation with staff, but with Senator Przanski helping us out on this one. And this was to add to LIPSIX a representative from the community-based nonprofit victim service providers to LIPSIX. Quite simply, as we went through the very first iterations of justice reinvestment with the $15 million in the first biennium, we had LIPSIX reach out to us and say, who are these people in our community and who should we give the money to? But we thought that really represented that there wasn't good communication or even knowledge of working together and how the system as a whole worked. So it made sense to us that we should try to bring them into the fold of the LIPSICs and the work that they do. And so that is where the simple idea for the bill came, is just to increase communication between that nonprofit community-based victim service providers and the local law enforcement committee. This is, although it targets that nonprofit community-based victims providers, this is not to say that any other kind of victim service providers, for example, DAVAPs, are excluded from LIPSICs. LIPSICs chairs have the discretion to appoint additional members as they see fit. And frequently, district attorneys also bring those folks to the meetings or represent those interests themselves on the commission. So not an exclusion of them, but just to call out that this is a specific group that our 10% funds really go to, and so we thought it was important that they have a seat at the table on how things are spent.
Okay, any questions or discussions?
All right,
Last one.
Yeah, last one, our budget bill. So this is just kind of a high overview, and I've kind of touched on this, and we're going to get into it more with the specialty courts, but it really can't be understated how this was a tough session for a lot of agencies across the state, but CJC did really well. We got out with complete current service level. We did not receive any cuts except for the same cuts that every agency across the board did, which was just some reductions on a few travel areas and other things. So we did remarkably well. We had a very good session. We had a lot of support in the building, which, you know, it's great. Senator Brzezinski here and Representative Stark on the phone. You know, we have our advocates and our champions who really believe in the work that we're doing, and we just really are enjoying a good reputation, and I think that's reflected in our fiscal that we ended up getting with this. So there's that piece.
Senator Brzezinski.
Yeah, I just want to give acknowledgement to Senator Jackie Winters. Jackie did a lot of work on this behind the scenes. And as you can imagine, as with the dollars being as tight as they were, some of the funding that we received didn't come in until the end. And that was because of her due diligence. So thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, and there really is a list of other senators and House members that I could walk down that, but absolutely Senator Winters was integral to making this happen for us. So that's great news. We didn't receive any cuts. You all will recall at our last meeting, we were talking about how in the governor's budget, they were talking about putting our federal burn JAG dollars in to alleviate some of the general fund in our specialty court programs. That didn't happen, thanks to those of you who came down and testified on our budget's behalf to that effect. Appreciate that support, because I think our commission, I think the subcommittee really understood how we use those burn JAG dollars in this state, which is to develop and fund and almost seed fund innovative programs that could benefit everybody across the state. And although we're obviously big believers in the specialty court programs, you know, having that flexibility to fund some innovative things and try new stuff is really crucial to our public safety system. So they received that message loud and clear, and the federal burn JAG dollars were not supplanted into the specialty court funds, which is great. So we got complete current service level across the board, and that will help make some of the decisions we're going to talk about a little bit later in this meeting a little bit easier for you. And then just to wrap up overall on other bills, and I've gone over them separately, but so we got current service level plus $7 million, plus 2 permanent FTE and 1 limited duration FTE staff. So that brings us to a 14 position agency from 11, which is also great growth.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner?
I think it need be, I think we all know, but I think it might be worth mentioning for the record that the growth of the responsibilities of this agency that are entrusted to it by the legislature, along with the funding you've just been talking about, are due to the incredibly competent staff that you represent and that you've hired. And I think we should take note of that.
Thank you. Absolutely.
I second that. I was just going to say the same thing. I think, you know, tracking the alcohol and drug money may be new and a big lift, but I think it speaks to the fact that the legislature and the people in the building, as you say, see this agency as someone that does a good job that they can count on. So, excellent. Okay. Anything else from commissioners in the legislation?
One more update, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Just on staff. Paul Egbert has been with the Criminal Justice Commission for, before I started here, I think 2012, end of 2012. He left our agency at the end of this biennium to go on to a great opportunity to lead leadership training across the state. And so he has moved on to that position. While he was doing that on rotation, we had Rem Nivens helping us out. He was on loan to us from housing. Rem was a great help to us throughout the legislative session and just kind of a steady hand for those of us trying to get through that. So it was great to have Rem, and now he has also been picked up and he's been hired as the executive director of the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission. I have agreed that Rem can stay within the CJC since he's a staff of one. We can accommodate him. So he will stay with us. We will be co-located as two commissions, and I look forward to working with the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission more closely, especially on things like 1041. So just some updates there.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Next on our agenda is to adopt the Justice Reinvestment Rule changes, and Ross Caldwell.
Thank you. We're going to hand around
I know. Sure. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, print one, but now I have the official one. Just, I got one. Yeah, thank you.
You? I got it. Yeah. Already got it. Thanks.
good morning. Ross Caldwell from the Criminal Justice Commission.
Madeline Dardo, Criminal Justice Commission.
So the Justice Reinvestment Rules changes, this is the adoption phase. You've seen these at our last meeting. There's a couple of tiny tweaks that we made after the last meeting that we want to call your attention to, but for the most part, everything is as you've seen before. And then we've also gone through our public comment period in that time, and we got our one and only public comment yesterday afternoon. So we sent it out to you as quick as we could, and I don't know that you've actually had time to read through it, but if not, you've got a copy, so we can take time to do that if you want. All right, so just to call your attention to a couple little tweaks. So in working with our council, if you remember last time, I think we'd had some discussion about we wanted a little bit more time than 60 days, which is what we'd had in the past for the grant application deadline, and to make award notifications, I'm sorry. And so we kicked around the idea of 60 business days, and then someone, I think it might have been Mr. Bovett, suggested, why don't you just do 90 days and make the number bigger, which is what we decided to do. That way we don't have to give definitions for business days. So we did that, fascinating as that is. And the only other real change is here on page 4 in section 0070, which is with the application processing. Anything that comes through the grant review committee, previously the language said you would provide a final approval in whole or in part, which actually didn't give this body the discretion to give a complete denial. So we just added in or denial. Very minor change. Like most of the changes with this really has just been about kind of cleaning up the language and streamlining things. So nothing terribly exciting or controversial. Other than that, there were a few things where we renumbered some sections, and I think that's pretty much all we did since you last saw it. We had our written public comment. We announced that on May 15th. And we accepted comments through the end of business yesterday, which is pretty much when we received our one comment. So we apologize for not giving you more time to read that. We didn't have much more time to read it than you did. We had public comment here in this room on July 6th that nobody showed up for. So we did our due diligence there, and we sat in this room. And so we have the one comment from the Partnership for Safety and Justice, which you have, and we can discuss that if anybody has any questions or wishes to. And the only other really thing we have on this is that our effective date, and after talking with our council, effective on filing seems to be the best way to go. I think other rule changes, if you're kind of in the process of reviewing lots of applications and you need some time to let one batch go through, you might want to wait a little bit, but we don't have that issue here. So Our rule changes will be effective on filing once you approve them, and we'll move forward.
I read the letter, and I just wanted to clarify that I believe our discussion the last time was that we took out all the sections that they're referring to in the letter, but we also have really narrowed down what we know to be successful, the criteria, and those are sent out with the grant application. So, most of the applicants understand that, and the staff works with the applicants to get that done.
Yeah, there were some of the concerns in the letter, I think, are about counties telling us outcomes that they want to track to know their programs are successful. And we actually are able to look at the success of programs fairly well from our vantage point. And we also are still asking counties to let us know how they're going to track their program and how they're going to know that it's successful. So some of the things that used to be in the rules are now in the RFP, and I think that's one of the issues. But I think, a lot of the things in the letter are things that we discussed last time. So we're happy to take more time to go into it if anybody wants to, however.
Well, and I read the letter when I got it, and I was just going to put on the record just a little bit of the history of how we got here, because when I first crafted these rules, I basically just stole your drug court rules. And then you may recall that the very first grant cycle under 3194 was a one-page grant agreement. That's all it was. And so,
that's what I've heard, yeah.
Yes, and so it was necessary to have some of this in rules because there wasn't anything.
Right.
And so we've developed the program into a pretty big grant program that has it has a big grant agreement now with all kinds of stuff. And so I just view this, although I think PSJ was correct to point it out, I view this as surplus in the rules now because we're doing it by grant agreement now, unlike that first cycle, which was a free-for-all, maybe, is the only way to describe it, because we needed to get the money out fast.
Right.
And so that's the historical context of why this was written this way back when we wrote those.
And I think we have multiple layers now with our contracts, with the RFP, and then with the OARs, and then with the statutes. So some things exist in different places, and I think it used to all be kind of condensed into one layer. So that's what I mean when I say that we tried to streamline it.
Any other commissioner questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a brief question. Do you plan on responding the way you've just explained it to us to PSJ, and in terms of what their concerns are and how their concerns really aren't as much as concerns as they think it is?
We responded to some of PSJ staff actually a few days before we got the letter. So I don't know if everyone in their organization has kind of heard our thoughts on that, but we'd be happy to continue to talk to them. I mean, we bump into them a lot, so we'll definitely discuss.
Yeah, I mean, they're a good community partner with this agency, and I think it'd be courteous to.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
I'd move that we approve these proposed administrative rule changes.
Second.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Next item, Justice Reinvestment Grant Program changes and processes. Madeline?
Sure. So we have 3 Justice Reinvestment Program changes from 15-17 that counties have submitted since we last saw you all. These are requests for new programs, so by our practice, they have to be approved by the commission. And then at the end, we will also have a question for your consideration around our change approval process. So the first, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. So the first is from Tillamook County. Tillamook found that they were not spending as much on a food card program that they had expected, and then also a GED program. So they decided to make a request to move $10,540 from those programs to a existing work crew program to expand that, to be able to have more local sanction options for folks on supervision. We do request that when folks make a program change request of us, that they also tie it back to at least one of the 4 goals of justice reinvestment. Tillamook County made a tie to reduce prison usage by having another local sanction option, also reducing recidivism, increasing public safety, and holding offenders accountable. This is really basic information. We get a lot more than this from the counties in the request, so if you'd like to know more, just please stop me and I'll kind of beef it up a little bit. So staff does recommend approval of this particular program change.
Take these one at a time, or do you want to wait till she's going through all three?
Let's wait and go through all three of these, and then we can see if we have questions.
Sure. So the next one comes from Sherman County. Sherman County would like to move $10,000 that they had reserved for training for Tri-County Community Corrections to a re-entry program at Norcor. This is the same program that the commission approved for Wasco County and Hood River County. Sherman County would like to chip in to be able to pay for some of their folks that are participating in that program at the shared facility. And they tied it to reducing recidivism, increasing, I won't repeat all of those, but you can see, just so you know that we are making sure that these new programs actually have a tie-in to one of the 4 goals at minimum. They'd also like to switch around $10,000 for the purchase of GPS and alcohol monitors. So for their folks on probation, they see this as, again, providing kind of another option as far as tracking that will hopefully reduce their prison usage, as little as it is. And then the final would be $10,000 moved within their community outreach category to implement a program called the Sanctuary Model. This is a trauma-informed care training program that's currently being implemented in the Gorge. And it will be targeted for public safety agencies as well as service providers, mental health, human services folks within the county, and then also other community partners and providers that work with the offender population in Sherman County. And then the last one is Crook County. Crook found they were not using as much money for their sanctioned jail beds program as they previously anticipated. They would like to move $30,000 from that program to a men's transitional housing. Looks like they're partnering with Les Schwab Tires to get a building that they're going to move to some county property and have a men's transitional housing option. And so that money would go toward moving the building and then also fixing it up so that it's habitable. And then also a batter intervention program. They'd like to move $15,000 to this program. The commission may remember that during the 15-17 application cycle, Lane County had applied for a batter's intervention program that our research team was concerned around the use of the Duluth model, which is kind of a power and control domestic violence intervention model that's been found to not only be not exactly effective, but could actually have harmful impacts. And so when the Crook County application originally came in, it did include the reference to the Duluth model. We worked with Crook County to shift to another model. What we're recommending for approval today is basically a program that's very similar to the one that the commission approved for Lane County.
Commissioner Hicks?
Thank you. What is the Norcor reentry program?
Sure. So it's kind of a combination. It's a jail treatment program, and then they're working toward a kind of a warm handoff component into the county. So they complete parenting classes. They have some substance abuse treatment. They have some cognitive treatment. A criminal attitudes program, I believe, is what they use within the facility. And then they work with whatever county, one of the 4 counties that they're transitioning into, to work with the probation officer around continuing that. What's that?
Oh, sorry.
Continuing that the work that was started in the jail.
Do you know, is Norcor like a privately contracted organization? Do they have like a contractor that provides the staff there?
No,
I don't think so.
Norcor's a 190.
Oh, 190, okay.
Formed by the 4 counties up in the Gorge area. It's a regional jail.
I mean, who works there though? I mean, do they contract that out, or are they just the 190 employees?
Public employees.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other discussion or questions? So do we have a motion to approve these changes to the grants?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, we have unanimous pass. Thank you very much.
And just really quickly, one final item. So as you all have seen, any new program requests that we get, if they would like to do something other than what was approved in their 15-17 application, that is something that we take before the commission. Sometimes we get requests from counties to move money around within a program. So say, they're spending less on personnel, they like to spend more on supplies, but it's not necessarily a new program or significant change. Those are requests that we've been kind of handling as staff. So we We do also sometimes receive the larger requests for new programs and folks want to actually begin implementation sooner than when there's a commission meeting coming up. As you all know, there are times when there's maybe 3 or 4 months in between meetings. There are times when there's more work to be done, and so those meetings are happening more often. What we've been doing up until recently is that if we do get a request from a county that they would like to begin implementation sooner than the commission can approve, either because they want to start hiring or they have an opportunity to purchase a property, that request has been made of the chair to see if there's an opportunity to do a pre-approval. We just wanted to make sure that we bring that before you all and then and pose that question for your consideration to see if that's a practice that you want to continue.
So yeah, as Madeline's pointing out, I mean, it's really just kind of staff processing, and we, as you can see, and I think as evidenced by the unanimous approval of these grants, we work with the counties quite a bit to make sure that their asks are within the guidelines and what we think would be received well by the commission. So any kind of staff approval or directly a chair would not be a major program shift or anything like that, but just something that needs to happen quickly and also is in line with the application that's already been approved by this commission is the idea. So just to kind of give us a little bit more alacrity to get things done.
And what I've asked is, what I didn't want to have happen is have these changes being made without us, someone on our commission at least knowing about it. So I asked them at least notify me, let me have a look at it.
Question, Chair?
Yeah.
I support the program. I support the practice that's being proposed with one question, and that is, it strikes me that in all likelihood, CJC's executive director and staff are recommending its approval, followed then by your review and presumably subsequent approval. Would there be a situation where it would be where CJC staff does not recommend approval and then comes to you? And is there a vision for what that, is that woven within the same structure of what we're talking about, or would that ever occur?
If it did, my view, it'd have to come before the commission.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
there's
And that makes sense to me.
Yeah,
It's
there's
a little bit why I
disagreement.
raise it is in the unlikely event that you
Yeah.
have such a submission.
It's a good question.
Mr. Chair, this practice in effect is what Chair Larson and the director have had in place for the 8 years I've been on this commission, and I see no reason why it should change. The current chair is every bit as wise as the previous chair. So, it stops us having to have emergency phone meetings for things that really don't require.
Sure.
I've also asked that a record of this be kept that we could distribute to the commission, so we all know.
They're usually fairly minor changes as these ones were. A lot of times it's like a training will come up and they have a deadline where they need to sign up for the training and a county wants to send a handful of people and they want to use some of their justice reinvestment money or something like that. And as opposed to scrambling you all to get you together or something like that is generally when we use it.
Do you need a motion, or are we just good consensus marching ahead?
I think we're okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's not in rule or anything. It's just
Yeah.
commission practice,
Practice.
staff practice.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Now to the meat.
Okay, next item is our special court program.
Stacks out.
Tiffany Quintero will present.
So while Tiffany's handing these out, I'll just kind of tee her up a little bit. We held our request for proposals from the counties for the specialty court grant. As you'll recall from our last meeting when we went through the requests that we received.
I think I have it.
In the previous biennium, CJC funded 36 courts across the state. This biennium, we are receiving requests for 41 courts, so it'd be a growth of adding 5 courts that we had not previously supported financially as a commission. They may have already been in existence. It's not necessarily that they're new courts, but just that they're asking for our financial assistance for them to continue forward. So staff, Tiffany, Chris Thomas, who is a recent addition to the commission, have been working on those requests. going through those. We also had a group of volunteers that got together and rated and reviewed the applications for your consideration. And so Tiffany's just kind of walk us through the background, and then at the end we have a proposal for you that we think will be well received by the commission, and will be open for discussion, and then whatever decisions you all make in terms of funding.
Tiffany?
Yes, thank you. I gotta figure out how to make this go forward. So I just thought we should include the statutory authority for the specialty court program. So you guys have the more in-depth list in this handout, but just for the sake of the PowerPoint, the specialty court grant program is to make grants to counties to fund their drug courts, new or existing. So the grant program budget, as Mike mentioned earlier in House Bill 5005 that came through with a fully funded court program at $15,681,406. So that was really exciting because we were concerned that it was going to have some cuts. So we were really happy to see that. So that's the 15.2-ish that we included for 15-17 for grant awards, plus the inflation amount. So that's how we get to that number. The grant applications that we received based on the reduced rate that we'll talk about a little bit more, but you guys might remember we talked about it a few months ago, came in at $14,595,000. So we're a little bit under the budget that we have. So that's exciting news when we're looking at reduced rates. The allocation breakdown for that 15.6 is a lot of general funds. So the 13.3, we were able to hold that harmless, which was great. The other funds are from the asset forfeiture that we received. And then the federal fund is the $1,963,000, which is what we put in last time for federal funds, plus the inflation on that. So that is, again, the exact same plus inflation. The solicitations that we received, this is the same slide as what you all saw last time. So it's the rate, the amount of drug courts that we received, plus the total amounts for each type of court. And again, the baseline budget formula. So it's the participants served monthly times the fixed reduced rate times the 730 days in the biennium, and that's how we get to this formula number that was the $14,595,000. So again, this is just a reminder slide. So I've been talking about the reduced rate, which is the 1719 rate. We expected to receive a cut to our program with the budget deficit. We didn't. So looking at our opportunities to be able to bring some of these courts back up to the full rate is what we've gone back to and done some work on in the office. Again, these rates need a little bit of work, and so we'll talk about that a little bit more also, but bringing them back up to the full rate so that they can get the amount of funding may be the better option in some areas. So for our internal application process, as Mike mentioned, we reviewed internally for the content of the applications and the completion. So we made sure that everything that they needed to include to be an accepted application was received. And then we took it to the panel to review and discuss the different applications and score. As you can see, the scores didn't have a huge difference. The lowest was 74.75 and the highest was 93, so that left us a median of 86. Those were scored by the panel reviewers. CJC was in the room. We had discussions with the reviewers on why they were scoring it the way they did and what that looked like. And what we also realized at the time when we were going through the scoring process and having additional discussions is that the medically assisted treatment, MAT, question that we had does not apply to juveniles, and it did not apply to mental health courts. So for that reason, we gave all juveniles and all mental health courts the full points for that. We also gave mental health courts the full points for UAs because that was how the panel reviewers decided to address that issue. So it did change the scores some. But if we have a budget like we currently do that's current service level, it may not be an issue and we may not have to worry about the scores in general currently. Right now, also, the way that our program's structured, we have the word competitive in our solicitation and in the application process, but we spend a lot of time figuring out how we can best fund all of these drug courts and keep all of these it's really a big community resource to have these. We don't want to be cutting the community resources out and saying you're not going to be able to fund these. So it's a thought process of, is it a competitive grant where we're going to cut courts based on the score, or is it a best practices kind of performance grant? We want you to be serving all of these participants of the drug courts to the best of your ability with the money that we have to provide you. So that's another consideration as we go forward.
So I'll just jump in and supplement what Tiffany's saying, which is in the past we've really kind of run this as a competitive grant program. Or at least in name, but in effect it really has been us looking at, are the courts doing the things that are supported by evidence and best practices, and let's fund those things. So although we have had to make some cuts in the past of courts that weren't following those best practices, it wasn't really that they were competing with each other head to head. It was more that those courts weren't following the things that we know to be successful and are evidence-based. So we as staff are, in this biennium, and Tiffany will talk a little bit more about this, really going to examine how we administer this program. There's nothing in statute or rule that ties us to making this a head-to-head competitive grant program. So it really has just been the way that we have approached it as staff and as a commission for the past years. But we're really looking at and considering more of a funding the best practices and supplementing those things and keeping courts doing the right things in their communities to get the best results. So we're evolving on how we viewed this program as staff.
And to follow that up also, the legal sized paper that I gave you guys in the handout, that was not an attachment that you received ahead of time, so it's this one. This has a lot of kind of in the weeds detail about each of the applications that we received, but just in case you have any questions, I would like to walk through the columns and kind of tell you what they represent very quickly. So the score column, that's the average of the panel reviewers that we had. We had 5 panel reviewers. That's their average of how they scored the grants. It does include the adjustments for MAT and UAs, and that's kind of where the colors are. So the code is down at the bottom. The court name is just that type. The budget request, so that's the baseline. That is the amount served times the rate that we gave them at that reduced rate times the 730. So that was the budget request that they were able to put forward. In some cases, that budget request is actually lower than what their formula baseline would have otherwise been, but this is the amount of money that they requested capped at that baseline. The capacity is the number of people that they can serve based on what the court feels they have the resources to be able to serve. So that's what they've given us. In any given month, they can serve up to that number of people. The number served is how many people they actually serve in any given month. Why some of those are higher or lower is, I guess, because there's some variability in the definitions of how the courts interpret those two questions. And so we're going to work to make that a little bit more solid next time so that we're getting the same information from all courts. But it's very difficult to compare those numbers and make a lot of sense out of them right now. But I wanted you to have them in case you were wondering what we were looking at. Other funding is the amount of just that other funding that they have, whether it be local, federal, different state dollars, whatever that they might be including into the treatment program somehow. The percentage of treatment funds, sometimes CJC is paying for all of their treatment dollars, and the treatment providers may or may not be getting recouped from OHP. In other cases, they're doing a very good job of billing OHP to their maximum and, you know, just charging us for what we should be paying for, the difference. And then the last columns with all the little X's are the different categories that we may or may not be paying for. So if there's an X, it's obviously something that we're paying for. It does not mean that the grants or the courts do not have these other services. It just means we are not paying for them. They didn't ask for money to pay for those services in the grants. So that's just an additional thing. If anybody has any questions about it, I'm happy to talk more, but just in case you had more questions. So for 15-17, we had a lot of underspending, which is interesting. And we're working on, how we might be able to better address that going forward as we watch the finances of the courts. In some cases, it was because they had a federal grant for the first half of the 15-17 biennium, so they didn't charge the CJC at all. In other cases, it was because they just didn't have the amount of participants that they maybe expected come in, so they were underspending there. It just kind of depends. Some of these courts, they bill kind of on a, it's, every month is the same, every quarter is the same, so they have it broken down that way. And other ones, they're paying for services specifically in the courts. So if they don't have a lot of housing costs that month, then we'll see a lot of variability there. So this is just a graph to note that the ones in the red are significantly underspent, over 40%. And then as you go down, I guess that's the burgundy, but as you go down, you can see kind of how it works. I do want to make a note that this is our projected underspending. So we tried to give all of these courts the benefit of the doubt and say you will completely expend all of your travel dollars, because many of our specialty courts are at the federal or the national conference right now. We haven't received those bills yet for quarter 8. We also assumed that they would spend the highest bill that they have ever sent us. So we tried to make adjustments and say they're going to spend down their money as much as they can, but we don't know for sure. So you all have seen this slide before. I just updated it. So it's updated state of what our burn jag looks like. And the handout goes with that for the more detail for the statewide programs. So we have, due to the underspending, we have a lot more burn jag than what we expected to have. We expected for the 13 JAG funds in that first column to be completely expended. It's not. So we have 13 through 16 of burn jag, so 2.8 million. And then we also have the projected 17 and 18. I've projected that at 80% of what the award has been in the past, only to be conservative, because we don't really know what those numbers are going to look like yet. So, that could be more, but again, we don't have those figures yet. So I projected it a little bit lower. But the good news about this is that we have $3.3 million in burn jag funds that we have obligated to specialty court programs. We told the Legislative Fiscal Office when we were going through our budget that we would put, $300,000, or at 80%, it's $240,000 towards the specialty court program from the next couple of burn jag grants. So that's why those numbers are in there. That gets us to a really nice federal pot and still funds all of our other federal programs. Still gives you guys a nice chunk of unobligated funding that you can do with as you please, and keeps us whole as far as all of that goes. Any questions? So our legislatively adopted budget, which is the bill that passed, is 15.6, like we talked about. There's underspending of 1.3 million, which gets us to total grant funds of 17 million based on the JAG funds that you guys just saw, the 3.3 and all of that together. So again, when we are at a $14.5 million ask from the courts based on the reduced rate, and now we have 17 million, it gives us some flexibility to be able to do some different things. So staff worked together. We tried to come up with a good recommendation that would keep us within that $17 million budget that we figured out, and give courts the opportunity to get up to full rate if it made sense. So I'm going to walk through what that might look like, and what you'll need is this handout. this one here. So we had 4 courts that came in with an ask that was less than their baseline. So our logic as a group was, why would we give them more and increase them to the full rate when they're asking for less than what they could have even asked for? So those are in yellow, and I would recommend that we only give them what they asked for. The next group is funded also at the baseline rate, which is the 17-19 reduced rate. They're new courts to us currently. We don't have a 15-17 grant with them. We have had in the past, but we don't now. So I would recommend that we fund them at the baseline rate because we don't have a lot of background to be able to say, yes, they need the more or not. The next group.
And also, just to add to that,
Sorry.
those courts, because they would be new grantees to us, the fact that the rate was reduced from a previous biennium, they're not being reduced in any way because this is the first time they're getting the funding.
Right. The next group, the blue highlighted, that is the amount of underspending that we are projecting for this biennium. So at the end of this cycle, when we receive their last Q8 invoice, this is what we expect based on projections that they will be returning to us. So that baseline rate, I recommend that we fund them at the baseline because they've significantly underspent on their current award. And these are all of the grantees that have spent less than or will be returning to us 20% of what they received or more. So it's a significant difference. We didn't take into account the ones that are, 10%, 8%, those kind of things, because they may spend it all, they may not. But the ones that have some significant underspending, I would recommend that we continue to fund them at baseline. The other important thing to note on that is that the baseline funding that they've requested is still as much or more than they've expended for the 15-17 biennium or what they were projected to spend. So it pretty much keeps them level. And then the remaining courts that have the full rate next to them, I would recommend that we bring them back up to the 15-17 rate. And you can see where that's projected in the second column. So we have the reduced rate in the 17-19, and then the 15-17 rate is that increased rate that we had last biennium. I would recommend that we fund them at that rate to bring them back up. So that brings us to $16,785,000, which is still a little bit under the $17 million. But we have a plan of how we might be able to deal with those excess funds and still use this model for the original grant funds going forward. Is there any questions around that so far?
So this would just represent essentially all the money that we are going to recoup or did not expend on underspending. We're plowing right back into the program and getting us back up to that. So what Tiffany has outlined here is really kind of staff's recommendation to keep the courts that were spending the money whole, courts that were demonstrating they didn't need all of that money to a lower standard, and then new courts at the no reduced rate. So by doing this, that keeps us within that $17 million, which is almost $1.5 million increase to what this commission expended on specialty courts in the last biennium.
And then we have essentially a reserve, so if any of these that we've essentially pared down to what we project, and they have some anomaly, or maybe this is an anomaly, and they can come to us and say, almost like an emergency board type thing, hey, we need more. And so we have a reserve to do that, potentially.
Yeah.
Sure. Tiffany, were there any courts that didn't submit this time?
We did have a couple that didn't submit this time. Well, Umatilla pulled their application. I actually think that may be the only one. But I can't remember off the top of my head.
Question, Chair?
Yes.
And it's a bit of a follow-up to Rob's point or question, and that is with that available surplus funds, so there is that remainder left. Would it be understood or expected that that would be available to what we see on paper or additional programs that don't exist, or both?
So I would say that that's available to kind of what you see on paper here. So as we go through the PowerPoint, you'll see that I've kind of broken it down to the specialty court program as a whole versus the specialty court grant program. I think staff would recommend that we keep the 17 million that we've talked about within the specialty court grant program, which is all of these applications here. As long as we believe about a year in that they may need it and they can spend it. If not, then I suppose it could be up to the commission to say maybe we should look at some startup funding for some other court, or maybe there's a different court that didn't apply but now needs something. So, I mean, I would leave that up to you guys if you wanted to make a different call. But there's nothing in statute or in rule that makes that be so. This is just a recommendation for the program as we try to build out some structure, some greater structure for this program, because it's kind of pretty loose right now. We just need to really figure out what direction it should go. And to that, with the difference in these rates that we've just talked about, it makes it so not all of the mental health courts are getting one standard rate. So some are getting the reduced rate, some are getting the full rate. What Chris and Mike and I and the staff in general have talked about wanting to do going forward is take a really hard look at this program and the structure around it and try to build out something where we're faced with making decisions based on best practice standards versus competitive or non-competitive, and trying to say, okay, you need to be serving the high-risk people because that is who we are in statute trying to be funding with this program. And we need to know the risk assessment, and we need to know, their needs and these other things that are very concrete that people can report to us, but we haven't had that in place in the past. And so we're trying to build this out. And I think if we take the next 2 years to tie the standards that we are working on, that we have written, with the application, with the reporting, and bring all of that together, it will make it a really solid program that is structured maybe more a little bit like Justice Reinvestment, where they have some goals and they have concrete things that they can look at, where it just doesn't change as much because it's really based on some hard statistical information. Is that helpful?
It is. Thank you.
Chair, I have
Any other questions?
with regard to Umatilla County, without getting into things that are inappropriate for a public forum, I know this commission has worked with different treatment courts in the past and done remedial work with them if they were not slated to get funding because they were not using best practices or were deficient in some other way. Is Umatilla one of those kind of situations where there's room for the commission to try to keep that service in that community?
Executive Director Smith. Yeah, I'll field that one because I've been talking to Dale Primer, who was a big person who was funding the drug court in Umatilla County. And Umatilla actually they looked at the governor's budget, the projected budget, and they looked at how we were projecting our rates to decrease, and they preemptively decided that just wasn't enough money for them to continue funding that program. And what their plan was to kind of take a breather and restructure their court and maybe come back and approach us again with a more dialed in program that they feel actually follows best practices, because I think they even felt they were a little far afield, and some of the folks that they were serving in this drug court maybe wasn't the best, most efficient use of their funds. So they were going to kind of take a breather and come back. Could be one of those courts that halfway through the biennium, like Tiffany said, if we have $270,000 that's unallocated in this program, they could apply to us and we could get them going again. But in the meantime, after they made that announcement, their local representative took it upon himself to try to find them funding. I'm not sure that he was successful in doing that by the end of the day, but I'm also not positive that he wasn't. So I know that they were searching for other funds to try to get it going. So we're We're in conversations with them, working with them, but at least their initial plan was to take a breather, dial it back, and then reapproach us in the future when they feel like that they're ready to relaunch.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
So, we kind of already talked about this, but this gives us about 234,000 of kind of a discretionary grant funds where people could come to us and say, we need to beef up our program a little bit to fund this best practice, or, make it better by funding this position, kind of thing. So it gives the commission some discretion with these funding to be able to add to any of these grants if that becomes necessary, or to put it towards some other program, depending on what you all choose to do.
Question?
Commissioner, go ahead.
Would the allocation of the discretionary funds be for basically first come, first serve, a worthwhile program that asks first would have first dibs on available funds?
Yeah, it would kind of need to go that way, but I mean, it's up to the commission if you guys want to say, let's give all these courts a year and kind of see how things go, work within your budget and see what you can make happen. You could do it that way. I mean, it's really up to the commission as to how you would want to do that.
Yeah, there's no formal application process that we would launch, or an RFP or anything like that. It would just be when courts approach us or different systems and say, hey, we really need help with this. Can you do anything? That's what we work with them.
So, just, do you have any discussions around this?
Are there any other questions or discussions around the funding model? I want to thank you, just for myself, for putting the time into coming up with at least a thoughtful start of a process for us to start talking about. So it's well done.
So I had a question, and I think I heard it correct, but just to make sure, as I wrote down my notes. So this goes back to one of the first slides relative to the definition of variability of definitions and those served. Right? We had a column for capacity and those served. And I thought you said, and I just want to confirm, that it was served per month as opposed to a different period of time.
Yes, it's served per month.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions, discussion? Okay. Do I have a motion then to accept this?
Mr. Chair, point of, I guess, procedure, I believe I'm a non-voting member, and so I've been somewhat silent on making motions or voting. So I just want to ensure that is correct before.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'd move to approve the CJC staff's recommendation for funding these programs in the 15-17 biennium.
Point of clarification, if I could, because it probably should have proceeded with the question. So I had asked that question relative to that discretionary amount, about that $234,000, and whether it was or should be limited to kind of what we see on paper here as opposed to new programs. And I heard Tiffany say that was really a point of choice by us, and maybe this was the time to make that choice. So it's a bit of clarification on your motion.
So, and to designate this reserve of close to $250,000 as supplemental funding for these programs listed here, unless we revisit it at a later time.
Because that was bifurcated, could we get the motion restated?
Yes, I was just going to say.
Okay, so I would move to approve CJC staff's recommendation that we fund all of the listed programs on this sheet, as well as the reserve amount to be left in reserve for supplemental funding of these programs.
Here, a second.
Sure.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, we have a unanimous decision. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Great work.
got time
So
for
we have
some?
just a couple other specialty court updates, and then we'll
Yes.
wrap.
So this, again, just some more of the statutory authority around the program as a whole and what specialty courts are our charge as a commission. So the case management system RFP posted at 11 o'clock. I got an email while we were here. I'm so excited.
We've literally been working on this for
Forever.
at least 19 months.
Yeah. So the RFP posted, so we should have some more information about how much the program is actually going to cost to not build out, but to customize and host for the next couple of years. Within 60 days or so, we should have that information to be able to make a decision on how we want to move forward, one way or the other. Currently, we have the general fund that was awarded in our budget of about $500,000, and then we have federal fund from 15 JAG that was approved in the application for 425, which brings us to 925,000. Projected costs for any hosting or change requests would be from JAG going forward, but we won't need to ask for that until fiscal year 19 of the JAG application, so we have some time. One request that the commission does want to make as staff is to have 200,000 of the unobligated JAG funds that we currently have or written into the next application to be able to support the implementation of this program. So there's still a very large project management plan that has to be written around it. All of the implementation work and customization work, working with the vendor once we choose one. All of that will still need to be done, and our current staff at the commission is pretty maxed out with the work that we have there. So if it would be appropriate for you guys, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. And I want to add before Mike says what he's going to say, the one thing that I asked Mike to do is just to make sure that we have somebody or position, or we figure out how to have an intermediary between the agency and the implementation so that we have a successful implementation of a computer software program.
Yeah. So yeah, just by way of background, I think most of you have been around for this conversation. But yeah, we're trying to get a unified statewide treatment court tracking system that treatment courts could use both internally, but we could get statewide data from. Absolutely crucial for us to be able to study these programs, see how they're working, allow them, like we've done with Justice Reinvestment, to compare to each other and see if others are getting better results, and then share their practices and their knowledge. So currently, we used to have one in Oregon. There used to be a statewide system, and it's just kind of gone out of date. You know, as different courts and different things have updated their systems, the old statewide drug court treatment system hasn't kept pace. And so, you know, some courts are still using it. Some courts have reverted to Excel spreadsheets. Some courts have wanted to go out on their own and start looking at purchasing a new system. That, of course, would not be a desirable outcome for this commission, because if we had, you know, we're going to fund 41 courts, 41 different systems, or even multiple different systems. So we want to procure this one statewide system, and we'll make it available. The idea is to make it available to even those courts that the CJC is not funding. Because in the state, I believe at our last count, there was somewhere around 72 specialty courts. So we're funding 41. There's still another 30 courts out there that we're not even funding. But we'd love to make this available to them for all the same reasons that we already stated. So the $200,000 we can either build into our next JAG application, which Tiffany and I are currently writing and figuring out what we're going to apply to use that money for. Or we do still have some unobligated funds from previous JAG that haven't been used for one reason or another that we could repurpose to support this. But like Chair Ball said, obviously with any technology project in the state of Oregon, it's taken us a long time to get through this point because of all the safeguards that are put in place by the state in doing technology projects, and for good reason. But we really want to be careful that we do this right, and we don't have either the staff time or the expertise to really manage a statewide system implementation across all of these different courts. So the $200,000 would be to do that, to get that project manager essentially that would help work between staff and the vendor and the courts and just kind of make sure everything goes the right way, and get someone who's experienced and expert at doing that.
Can I ask a quick point of clarification too? Am I remembering this right? There are some essentially off-the-shelf versions that then we could work with. So that person, you know, probably wouldn't need more than that to do it, because we essentially have an off-the-shelf program that we would be modifying.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so in terms of, yes, all right, well, I think you're going to be gathering information about participants in an aggregate kind of format. You're not going to have a name tied to a diagnosis, if you will. This person is an addict, you know, opioid, for example. And the reason I'm going there is because, of course, maybe there's some HIPAA kind of concerns to be addressed. And also, I would also draw kind of a parallel to the way the state archivist is attempting to come up with a statewide system, not only for the state government, but also for even, you know, counties, cities, to basically have a statewide database for all public records. And you know, there's a lot of landmines out there on that. Not the least of which the people, you know, the inertia of just participating in that, and which one can imagine. But also, for example, you know, what if you have confidential memorandum that went out from the legal counsel's office, right? Well, now it's in the state archivist's possession, and now if I want to put a subpoena ducis tecum onto the state archivist to get the legal counsel's advice to the governing body. You know, are you following what I'm saying there? Okay, so the way they get around that, I mean, that'd be a problem, not only for us and our relationship with the bar, but also for a variety of reasons. Okay, they have a statutory carve-out that expressly, and this is, I'm talking about going forward, maybe in future legislative sessions, just looking at some of these particulars, talk to the archivist. There's a statutory carve-out that says that the archivist administrator, which is who we're talking about here, this separate person, would not be subject to such records requests and the like. And so I'm just throwing that as a couple of you know, these landmines exist, okay? I mean, a separate administrator is an excellent idea, I think, for a lot of reasons.
But I guess my question is your vision to have a statewide database that everybody's hooked into, or are we purchasing software that we're going to distribute and everybody has to keep their own database? I guess that's my first question.
Yeah, it's the second is, I think, what we're envisioning with the RFP.
Okay.
But then, in a way, we could, if we wanted to do a query, you know, you could pull data from.
But the databases would be essentially the property of each individual specialty court.
Do you know the answer to this in the RFP, Tiffany, how we wrote it?
Because depending on how you answer that question, Wally's concerns could either be this big or enormous.
So it's a statewide database, but yes, the courts each own their information individually. And the requirement is that these all be Tier 4, the hosting must be Tier 4. They are HIPAA and high-tech compliant, SOC 2 Type 2, and FedRAMP certified. I mean, we've got pretty much all the regulations in there that you can get, because we also have to abide by the CFR 42 compliance. So, yes, and we're very aware of those things and have worked that in. And there are some exemptions because they're court records, part of the court record. There's exemptions within the Attorney General's public records exemption law because of the court record piece. But again, yes, they are owned by each individual specialty court. That database software is, and as it comes to us, we'll de-identify it and then do the work with it.
Yeah, and so I think ORS 192 covers what you described, because we have the blanket exemption that pulls in 42 CFR.
Yeah.
And so if you guys, in your process of doing this, if you run into a need for a specialized statute for some reason, can you let me know?
Yes.
And then we can get that maybe done through Senator Brzezinski's auspices in 2018.
Yes.
So, approval of the 200?
Yes. So, do I have a motion to approve the $200,000 of unobligated burn jag funds?
I'll make that motion. I think this is a great idea as with all of the safeguards and conversation we've had in place. This is generally speaking, of course, a great idea to help us understand with the degree of consistency we desire, apples and apples relative to what we're doing around the state. So I think this is a tremendous idea, and make the motion to obligate now that $200,000.
I second that, and echo everything Rod said.
I have a motion and a second. Any other further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
And we have just one more item, is that right?
Yeah, sorry, I'll hurry.
He's
through
almost
these.
done.
Oh,
So our best practice standards, when we passed when 3194 was passed, it gave us the opportunity to work with the judicial department to write best practice standards for specialty courts. It also gave the Chief Justice the ability to issue an order that says that specialty courts will look at our standards and take them into consideration. We are now at a place where the final version of the standards has come back from this copy editor, and judicial is going to work with the Chief Justice to try to get that order issued. So that's really exciting headway that we've made, because it hadn't even been put before the Chief Justice, and so we were really excited about that. And we've already kind of talked about the grant program model that we're going to do, but here's another quick thing. So we also, in addition to the 17 million, have $300,000 in targeted needs grant funding for specialty courts. So they can, any specialty court, doesn't matter if we fund them or not, can come to us and say, we have a best practice that we're trying to enhance, or we're trying to start up a program. Do you have $50,000 that you can grant us? You all did this with the treatment first model in Multnomah County for stop. We did that for the $50,000. We've done that for different travel needs in the past under $10,000. So those are kind of some things that we've done. I included this travel training policy here. So it kind of just outlined what courts could come and ask us for, so that we were operating within the same walls for each request, so that one court wasn't going to get 8 participants to go to the national conference, and other one we were going to be like, no, we'll just send 2. So we tried to put some frameworks around that so that it put everybody on an equal playing field. So we do have this additional funding also on top of the 17 million that we've already discussed and you guys have talked about already.
To be clear, in prior JAG 14 and 15, the commission approved setting aside $400,000 to specialty courts for these targeted needs. So it's been approved by this commission already to have that money set aside. And that's the money that we drew down on, like Tiffany said, to get the stop court up and running again.
Thank you all again.
And for other requests and training and things like that. So that is money that the commission's already set aside. We still bring those requests back to the commission when we get them, but just as she's pointing out, it's another pool of money that we can draw on to help courts if they need specific things.
so we don't need to do anything here?
Nope. It's already there.
Letting you know. So I thought this was exciting to show because it brings the specialty court program as a whole up to almost $18.5 million, which is a significant increase when you pile everything together. So the case management system that we already had allocated, plus the 200 that you all just approved, and the targeted needs that we've already had allocated. So it just brings it to a nice, healthy chunk that I thought was worth noting. And then in the upcoming discussions, we'll have about what we want this program to look like going forward, talking about how to structure the application next time, structure the reporting so that we're getting the information and comparing, like you said, the apples to apples, and using the case management system to the best of our ability to get the information that we need. So with that, I am finished.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Okay, is there any other business before the commission and commissioners have anything? Okay, seeing none, I will officially adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
My goodness.
And
And ahead of schedule, too.
Well ahead of schedule. Let's get some.
Hello, everybody. I run fast.
Standard locale. Shift it up. Yes, I do.
That's a nice touch because it never felt like we were being hurried.
On a low carb, low sugar.
So Greg, what part of Eugene are you in?
Yeah.
Actually, 4 years ago, we left 30 pounds and moved out to Crestwell out in the country. So we have a little
I've gained about that much by eating badly.
I
things like that to,
and
with
my motivation
because
is having a young
4
son.
years ago, we knew we were going to be
Everything going in his body was
retiring and
awesome.
too long, and the idea.
Yeah, I should be. Right?
Yeah, really. Seriously.
I know. It's so
Hey,
true.
there are times when that sounds good to me too.
Adam's Group has a great.
And I went to U of O, so I meet and get law school. Anyway, so I've got a fundamental awareness
We'll have
more
to,
than many, I guess, about Eugene.
Yeah, about 8
Springfield and the surrounding
Yeah,
area.
about 8 miles south of Eugene is Crestwell.
All right.
Right off I-5.
All right, well, while you're getting things wrapped up, I'll truck it on over.
That's the only one I know.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll see you for online.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, me too. Thanks.
So,
But this year went well?
yeah, I think so, yeah.
See you again.
See you.
Chair?
All that, made all that came through, so I'm on the management team. Shay's on the management team. So he gets a little bit more of the overall coordinating stuff that's coming through. All right. Incapacitated right now with this.
I like doing this work.